Bob, for the benefit of our viewers, someone out there that doesn't know who you are, tell us who you are. Give us your credentials and where you've worked.
Well, I'm a physicist and a scientist. I've worked at various government institutions, one of them being Los Alamos National Labs in Los Alamos, New Mexico, and also I'm more prominently known for working at Area S4, which is about 15 miles south of Area 51 in the Nevada desert, which is a top secret government research facility.
Where did you go to school, Bob?
I went to school at MIT and Caltech, also a couple other junior colleges here and there in California.
And what was your field of study?
Field of study was physics and electronics technology.
And when you were working for these different installations before you went to S4, you didn't have any connection with flying saucers whatsoever, did you?
No, I didn't have any connection. And in fact, I didn't even believe in them. I thought it was just, the rantings and ramblings of crazy people, more or less.
When was the first time that you actually began to believe or got interested in the subject enough to want to go someplace and maybe work with them?
Well, I was never interested in the subject at all, primarily because I didn't believe in it. It's when I was offered a job. Working on advanced propulsion systems is how it was advertised to me. And it was only later that I found out the job I was employed to do was to back engineer extraterrestrial craft, or an extraterrestrial craft. And it really happened backwards from the normal chain of events.
How did you come to get the job at the S4 area?
Well, that's a good question. And I really don't know if I can answer it. I don't know what motivated them. There are certainly more intelligent, more educated people around. There is a wide variety of high-profile scientists and physicists that they could have pulled out of the works anywhere. If anything, your guess is as good as mine on that. I really don't know why I was chosen. I did have not really connections per se, but I did know a couple people that were also involved in the project. I really didn't know they were at the time, but they could have put a name in, and could have wound up that way.
You think that Dr. Teller might have had anything to do with it?
It's a substantial possibility. At one time, while I was working at Los Alamos, I went to see one of his lectures. I got there early, and he was outside, and coincidentally, at that particular time, I was on the front page of the newspaper he was reading, and he was reading about an article about a small Honda Civic that I had converted to run on jet power. And I introduced myself and explained what I was doing, and some years later, I had sent a resume to him and some other national labs when I decided to get back into the scientific field after I had moved to Las Vegas. And it is substantially possible that he had a hand in doing it. He did refer me to someone at EG&G, which in turn did lead to the employment at S4.
When did you actually see the first vehicle or ship or craft that you knew for sure wasn't of this manufacturer on this planet?
Well, I did see it probably the second or third time I went out to the facility. And at that time, I wasn't convinced that's what the craft was. When I first saw it, I thought that this was a U.S.-made, very advanced next-generation fighter, and in fact that this would explain all the UFO sightings. It was only later to find out that that wasn't the case when I started receiving some documentation on the craft and actually got to go in it and found out what the scope of the project was. But I had seen it earlier on, but really didn't know what I was looking at.
And what was the scope of the project? What were you supposed to do to this craft?
Well, the scope of the group there, the people at S4, were to back engineer, essentially take apart and discover the manufacturing process and materials used to produce this craft, this flying saucer. More specifically, my group consisted of me and another person, his name was Barry, that we dealt with the power and propulsion system of the craft, and we were to back engineer that. We were to see if the power and propulsion system could be duplicated, and if it could possibly be duplicated with earthly materials instead of any exotic foreign materials that we might have come across.
When you saw that craft and you realized it was an alien craft, did that upset you in any way, that knowing that here was a vehicle from another system sitting right here on the planet Earth, and of course always believing that there was no such thing, it was hallucinations and so forth? What was your feeling inside when you were confronted with the reality that all that you had believed before was gone now, and you had to take a whole new look at things?
Well, actually, that's a good question. A lot of people have said, boy, that must have been exciting, and that really wasn't the case. The feeling really came over me when I was permitted in the craft to see the placement of the subsystems that we were going to be working on. And it was not a feeling of excitement at all. It was a very ominous feeling, a feeling, like I've said before, that you shouldn't be there. It's very hard to relay, but it was a real overwhelming, odd feeling that I had. Without trying to use a pun, it was a very unearthly atmosphere, and as it should be, because none of the materials were familiar, none of the architecture of the device was familiar, and it was very odd.
Yeah, because obviously they were here and we weren't there, so being a scientist, you would know the ramifications of such a situation. Which brings me to this question: how far in the future do you estimate that craft was to what we're doing at the present time?
Well, I've heard other people estimate things like that, saying, well, it's 1,000 or 10,000 years in advanced of our technology, and I don't really find that to be the case. All I really find to be the case is probably a technology that's about 100 or 200 years in advance of us, and the only reason being is because they stumbled upon a device, a machine that can actually make gravity, that can produce gravitational waves. Now, this is something that our science and physics knows. We know what gravity is, we know how it works, but we really just observe it. We don't understand it, and we certainly don't have a machine that can create a gravitational wave. And because they've developed this, they have a unique propulsion system, and that has a lot of offshoot possibilities and other uses. Also, the power source is fairly unique. We know of its existence. There is a total annihilation reaction we know of. The 3 atomic reactions we know of are fission, as you see in an atomic bomb, fusion, as you see in a hydrogen bomb, and we're currently trying to make a fusion reactor to provide power cleanly. And we also know there's a total annihilation reaction, which is a extremely, virtually 100% efficient reaction that we're really haven't even begun to do any research with. But here are these systems in place operating, and it really didn't look that far in advance of what we were.
Well, one interesting thing, that reactor that powered this vehicle was very small in relationship to the power it produced, was it not?
Oh, it was tremendously tiny. You're looking at something that puts out more power than an average nuclear power plant, and if anyone lives near one of those, you know how big those things are. And we're looking at something, scarcely bigger than a basketball that's doing this.
Incredible. Do you think that these beings pose any threat to the human race?
I don't think so, and again, that's speculation. I really wouldn't know anything about that, but if the intent was to do harm, from all indications, it seems like, the Earth has been visited for thousands of years. And if there was any intent to do harm, it would have already been done. If anything, now this is just my personal speculation, I think we're more of a Disneyland, an interesting thing to observe, but I don't believe there's any real direct interaction. There may be, but I don't see any evidence of it.
Why doesn't the government just come clean on all of this? Because there's so much speculation on it, there's so much disinformation out there. Why don't they just come forward and say, this is what's going on, they don't pose any threat, and it's just something you're just going to have to live up to, people?
Well, it's difficult to do that. First of all, if they were going to come completely clean, they're going to have to admit that as far back as 50 years ago, they knew this was going on. And in the meantime, they've been spreading disinformation and lies about events that, that have occurred. So they're not going to go and say, we've been lying to you for 50 years. So to start with, there's a problem there. Even if they started today and said, well, we found out a couple things, and here's what we found out. Because these systems are advanced and they pose a real unique function, they present a substantial weapon potential. And because of that, all the information is certainly not going to be released. However, I've always wondered why at least the existence of the craft, at least a statement to the effect of, we have found some material, we have some information, a lot of it pertains to national security. However, we can verify the existence of life elsewhere other than Earth and technology that we have, and perhaps release a little bit of information here, but they're not even doing that. And on that note, there might be several reasons that we haven't thought of. Who knows what beliefs that it might interfere with? It's a scary thought. We've pretty much put ourselves in the center of the entire universe, that we're the most superior race, and it might upset people to find out that we're really not that significant.
Well, with that thought in mind, do you think perhaps maybe that the aliens themselves may be saying, look, it's better if you just kind of keep it quiet and let us just go on about observing your little Disneyland? And you think that might be part of it too?
It could certainly be part of it. It could be the architecture of the whole plan might have been laid down by them. Who knows what kind of communication, if any, that we've had. But, again, your guess is as good as mine on that.
How many different types of the craft did you see? Just one, or were there other styles?
Well, there was one craft that I worked on. That craft was a very sleek, thin-looking craft compared to the other ones that were there. There were nine craft. I nicknamed this one the sport model because it was a very sleek-looking 50s style flying saucer looking thing, and the name pretty much stuck and people were using that name. I really don't know much about the other crafts other than the fact that whether it was accidentally or just a coincidence that I happened to see them one time. All the hangar doors were open at one particular time when I was there, and normally they were closed, but for the most part the only information I have is on the craft that I particularly worked on.
So you don't have any idea whether the other craft came from different systems or they were all from the same system? You have no idea about that?
Well, I do know for a fact that the power and propulsion system in all the crafts were the same. Oh. So that either says, now you have to start speculating that, number one, they either all come from the same manufacturer, or number two, someone is subbing out parts. And your mind can run away on this somewhere, because you see obviously a vehicle like this is produced. Well, there must be a factory somewhere, and eventually your mind just runs off with you, and you have to draw a line somewhere.
Of course. It may be the day that we will buy the reactor and the system and the components from this big galactic company that has the exclusive on it. Who knows? Maybe there's some sort of a patent on this thing. Right?
It's possible, but to me, it's so hard to believe, and I know that's strange coming from me, but I kind of draw a line between the actual alien existence and a social structure, and I think that's to keep my sanity, and I pretty much only deal with the stuff that I know for fact and had hands-on experience with, because your mind can really run away with you, and who knows what's going on. You'll find yourself standing outside staring at the sky wondering why no one's going to talk to you. And so to keep my sanity, I just deal with what I actually know to be fact, and try not to speculate too much.
All right, we're looking at the interview suite at S4. It's kept dark for the comfort of the aliens. The figure who is just barely visible in the left foreground is the telepath, and behind the camera is a raked seating area for observers. Although in this case, I believe the only other person present was a military aide. The alien is seated behind a glass partition in a biocontainment area, which is maintained at biosafety level 2, the lowest designation. That's primarily for the protection of the aliens, not us. The theory is that if they were going to infect us with an alien bug, it would have happened 50 years ago. In fact, all the indications are the aliens eliminated microbial and viral life from their own ecosystem long ago. They aren't susceptible to our diseases directly, but it has been shown that microbes can reproduce and form colonies within their respiratory systems, which tends to exacerbate the debilities they seem to suffer anyway in our environment. In fact, you can see here the alien is beginning to flag. The interview was not going well. The telepath was trying to clarify some points from a previous interview, but he wasn't receiving coherent responses. As you can see, the being is in real distress. At this point, the telepath is sending out a message to the medical staff. He's trying to communicate with the alien, but he's getting no response. There's very little he can do. There's no direct connection between his space and the biocontainment area. That's the aide stepping in on the right. The medical staff should be there by now. They're slow in responding. There they are. I have to say the medical personnel at S4 are less than first rate. They tend to be selected for their willingness to keep secrets rather than their medical competence. By the way, he's not shining that light into the eyes. It looks that way, but in fact he's checking for hemorrhaging around the eye sockets and in the nasal cavity. I'm sorry. It's very hard for me to watch this.
Stumbled into this book. It came to us to be written. Suddenly we were in a wave of waves. UFOs were being seen across the country again. We were in what they call a flap. And people began experiencing things that they couldn't explain. Something was happening in our skies in the midst of Watergate, Agnew, the energy crisis, the Middle East. Something was happening and people couldn't understand what it was. We spoke about UFOs, but nobody really knew. And then it hit right here where we are. It hit Pascagoula. Charlie Hickson entered the news, and we had a book to write.
We were sitting on the other side of the pier with our feet, you know, over toward the river, fishing in the river. And the fish still wasn't biting, so I told Calvin, I said, well, you know, we might as well go home. But I guess that was when I heard it. It was some kind of zipping sound. And when I turned around, in this area out here, about 40 or 50 feet out there, there was some kind of craft, you know. It looked like it was going to come right onto the ground. But it came on down and hovered about a foot and a half or 2 feet off of the ground. We didn't know what to do, you know. The river behind us and that out there not knowing what it was. So, and then before we had time to really do anything, it seemed like an opening appeared. Toward the end, it was, you know, toward us. And the blue light, it had blue flashing lights as it was, you know, approaching the ground, but then they went out. And when the opening appeared, some source of light came from the inside. It was just almost blinding.
Sheriff Diamond, can you tell me just what happened that night?
No, sir, I can't. All I can tell you is there was 2 men came into the sheriff's department approximately 8:30 and 9 o'clock. They were all excited, upset, wanting to climb the walls, hysterical, crying. That's actually all I know is what happened. I mean, as far as me seeing what happened, I don't know.
We could see them in the opening coming from, you know, when it started out to craft. But
Did you think it was people coming out at first?
Well, they had. I kind of thought it was people at first, you know, off like that. But of course, when they appeared there in front of me, it was the most shock I've ever had in my life.
What did you see?
Well, they were shorter than me. I'd say about 5'2" or 3", and they didn't have a neck. Their head, it seemed to come directly to their shoulders, and they had something that came out to a point about where a nose would be, and on each side the ears. And I believe that they looked like they were a little longer on the ears than the nose.
But still pointed the ears.
They were still pointing, yes.
But since I was down there, and since I was a physician, and several other scientists and investigators were asked to consult and look into the situation, I was asked if would I mind if I would be present, and I said I wouldn't mind at all. And while it is still very difficult for us to believe that a spaceship landed and that robot-type creatures came out and actually took these two people into the spaceship, these men, in my opinion, believed that they saw this and that they were being honest in reporting what they have reported.
But it seemed to me when they came out that doorway, or that opening or whatever it was, then just almost instantly they were right there on us. And their arms, they had arms, and I saw the arms moving here and in the shoulders, but they had weld. I mean, their fingers were webbed, and then they had something like a thumb, and they were like this.
Mm-hmm. We questioned them at length. And then we left the room and recorded every all the conversation they had. Recorded between the two of them. And one of them kept wanting to pray. And he said, after all I went through on this earth, he said, why should I have to see something like this?
Calvin Parker, I was questioning him, and at one time he wanted to climb the wall. That's how nervous and how shook up he was.
Well, one on this arm like this, and on the other one, you know, they had my other arm like that. And I just seemed to lift up to the same height they were off the ground, and we just moved into the craft.
Now inside, how did they lay you out? Do you remember how it happened?
Yes. I didn't see any tables or chairs or anything in there. I'm not saying there wasn't in there because the light was almost blinding, but I didn't see any. And when they carried me inside, they seemed to just lean me back, you know. And this eye, I keep referring to it as an eye, and it moved up to in front of me about this close. And it started right at my eyes, looking me right in the eye. And it hesitated there for a few seconds, and it just started moving over my entire body. When they brought me from the craft along this area here, and they didn't drop me, you know, they just released me back to the ground. And I fell. I don't know why my legs were weak. I don't know why it was the fright or what it was, but I fell onto the ground. And that's when I seen Calvin. He's standing right over here in this area, and he was standing facing the river with his arms outstretched like that, just like he was staring at something.
Tell me about the lie detector test.
Well, so that was run by Pilkington. Was it Pilkington?
Pennington.
Pennington.
That they run this type of test about 6 times a day. And when they were asked to come over here to talk to these people, they had in their mind that it was just a big joke. And if I understand it correctly, they ran one test on Mr. Hickson. The machine showed that he was telling the truth. Then they run another one. And then the examiner, he began to wonder himself. So he ran the 3rd test, and he believed just what Mr. Hickson had told him.
Mr. Booth, tell me what happened that night in October.
Well, I got up and had turned off the TV and come to the front door, which you can see right behind me. Just as usual, checking to see if it was locked. So I looked out the window at the top, and naturally I saw this object above the street light out there. So naturally it caught my eye with the lights was on. I couldn't hear any racket or anything. So I opened the door after a few seconds to step out to see if I could really tell what it was. It just took off.
Can you describe it?
Well, it was round, had lights all the way around it, turning in a counter-clockwise motion. It had a dome on top with a bright light shining out through the top of it. To tell the actual figure of it or anything, you couldn't tell. You could just see the lights and the one on top.
With questions to ask you, but the first one that I want to come back to, you use the word spacecraft. How would they or you know that what they saw was actually a spacecraft?
Often the person has not actually seen the spacecraft, but often they have. A number of these cases, when they're floated through the wall of their home, through the window, through the door, again, so many of the details of these experiences make no sense in our kind of the Newtonian, Cartesian, Western, whatever you want to call it, notions of reality, and yet the stories are consistently described with again, the self-critical attitude that the people have, and they may see a typical unidentified flying object, a saucer-shaped or cigar-shaped vehicle on the ground of their home, emanating bright lights, or they may be taken by a small craft up into the sky to a kind of mothership, which they see very clearly. So many of them actually see the UFOs that and the insides are so uniformly described with rounded, curved walls and complicated instrument panels that it's become clear that it's some kind of craft in the sky, which they would naturally call a spacecraft.
I think people would naturally draw that inference, but to me it's still an inference. I think you might agree, we don't really know exactly what these things are.
I mean, fair enough. I mean, you could have, as we do have, very I mean, this gets really into the way of how we know anything, but or our use of language. But we call something which is seen in the sky and which seems to be moving from one place to another, we call it a spacecraft. Now, again, this has to do with where our own technology has come to. It could be created as a virtual reality and is similar, appears similar to what we already know as airplane or a certain type of aerospace vehicle, so we call it a spacecraft. But again, you know, if you want to get down to the very core of the way language structures reality for us, you could even question whether they're spacecraft.
Isn't it the case that you've described in your book cases that were reported, let's say 100 years ago, back in the 19th century, of people who talked about airships?
Well, the article's there by Jerome Clark, who's been a student of the UFO phenomenon for many years, and he went back and looked into the newspaper accounts of the airship craze of the last decade of the 19th century, and many of those vehicles would look kind of like balloons or looked like the technology of the time, but he went further than that. He actually did an exhaustive search of all of the photographs he could find and the descriptions, and lo and behold, many of them did appear very much like the current modern day UFO, but the people of the time did not have in our culture the technological knowledge to actually see them as what they were. So he's concluded that these were probably UFOs not so different from what we're seeing now, but our perceptual development hadn't reached the point where they could be perceived the way we now can see things in the sky more or less as we at least think they are.
Right.
And again, you're raising the question whether even that's actual or constructed reality.
Well, we could take this in so many different directions. Let's go back further into the past, because the accounts don't just begin even in the 19th century, do they?
Well, again, if you go back into the early times, you know, Ezekiel's wheel, which is now many UFOs think that was a UFO, or chariots seen in the sky, or you go back to the ferries that kidnapped people in Ireland and other countries. There is some similarities, but you're dealing there with oral traditions, and it's an easy leap of mind to say, well, we've had this going on all through the centuries and through the millennia even. The problem with that is the methods of knowing then were so different. You need to compare a phenomenon, you have to use more or less the same investigative method. And our methods now, as well as, of course, our perceptual capabilities are so different. For example, just take the matter of clinical study. The people that were reporting those experiences weren't being studied clinically. Now we have a tradition of when somebody's had an unusual experience or something that doesn't fit, or you want to investigate, you talk to that person in great detail, you get other witnesses, what they've seen. So we have a kind of body of investigative tradition now that can document what's going on. So from that point of view, this appears to have some distinct features. It also appears, now I'm getting more into my own kind of sense of this, that this thing is entering into our reality in a more hard-edged way. In other words, that the first case that we have is the Betty and Barney Hill case, this interracial couple that was coming back from their vacation in Montreal, and they saw a craft that emanated this bright light. They actually saw the creatures in the craft. They were confronted by these creatures. They were terrified. They were taken in. Each reports various experiments that were done on their bodies, skin scrapings, probings, and the accounts compare. And since that time, more and more cases are being reported, and it appears that the phenomenon is occurring with greater frequency now than in the past. But again, we don't know that. There are reasons, if that's so, why it might be so, but we're still trying to establish how distinct is this from earlier.
Okay, we're recording. State planet origin? Okay, yesterday you told us you traveled, and I quote, thousands of light years to get here. Yes. Tell us the truth, or the word, or another reader. It is truth. I thought it off. For no future. To travel in time. Is to travel in space. Different special generations. So I take it aliens took over our future, right? So you're human. Okay, so you evolved from us. Yes. So what are you doing here now? How? Okay, so how about we concentrate on your time? Try me. Wait, so you know the meaning of life? What's the difference? So you know how the universe is created? So you've seen God? Okay, illuminate us. What happens when we die? Okay, so let me get this straight. There's no death, and we all experience each other's lives, right? Okay, so how was the universe created, and why is it so perfectly made for us? Moving on. Okay, so why do we destroy ourselves with nuclear war? Can you be more specific, please? Okay, one last thing. What about morality? What do you base your morality on? I see. Okay, that's it. Thank you. Hey, Speed.
Wow, sir.
Are you scared of me? Because you should be. Okay, so you say you're from the future and an evolutionary descendant of humans. Yet you also say you're a different species. So, which one is it? Are you a descendant of humans or not? Then how do you know English? Answer me. If you don't answer, I'll administer another radioscope homie until your system collapses. Do you understand? Now, how do you speak English? So you just picked up English, just like that. Because you're so smart, right? Right. So, you said you know the origin of the universe, but you did not provide an explanation. So I ask you again, how was the universe created? Answer the question. Really? But you can't create something out of nothing. Here it is. Only a creator can make something from nothing. Wait, you just contradicted yourself. So? Wait, but you said there is an origin to the universe. There it is. I caught you in a lie. This universe is not existence. It is an infinitely small part of existence. Right, so now you're talking nonsense. Again, how was the universe created so miraculously? This universe is a spontaneous event. Inevitable within the entirety of existence. Every event can, will, and always happen. Including this universe. There are an infinite number of universes. Virtually all carry over so-called life. This universe is, by chance, stable, and has the occasional capacity to harbor so-called life. So, like just happened, right? In this universe, yes. Life, this world, is an inevitable consequence of this universe's physical properties. So are you telling me we're just random? Yes. This universe is indifferent to so-called life. How so? Life on this and every world can be destroyed at any time by a multitude of random events. Such as? Large geological supernova, solar flare, asteroid impact. So the universe doesn't care if we live or die? a second. We're more than just random. As I said, you are not capable of accepting the truths of existence. So, if we're just random, then there's no meaning to the universe. That is correct. So if there's no meaning in the universe, then what's the point of living? There is meaning. You just contradicted yourself again. No. You can't live a full life. You can't live a life at all. Do you think that meaning is somehow made up? Your species conjures meaning, but operates under the false belief that meaning is a mystical plan. It is not. So, what is meaning? Meaning is what you make it. Okay, moving on. You said we humans would die as a species. So, tell me, when does the nuclear war start?